under the hood, of course, because it's what's going on in the brain that matters. I'm going to depress you all completely, having heard all the introductions today, by giving you one of the summary items from today right up front. Here it comes. It is physically impossible to consciously do more than one task at a time. So every time you say, I'm multitasking, you're not. And I'm going to plant that little seed with you today. And we'll go straight to the first little bit. Just to remind everybody that my partner in crime, Jane, is going to be picking up on some of the things I talk about today next week when she talks about time management. So this is what we're going to be doing today. One role at a time, the impact of doing too much, bottlenecks and cues, and then a little summary about multitasking, some internal and external distractions, how to put on the brakes, something that I'm calling free will versus free won't, and then a distraction summary. And hopefully, although there's a few slides today, I've left enough time for a lot of discussion because I think it's really relevant having heard the introductions. So if you were at the session last month, you will know that these are the 5 main mental processes relevant to getting work done, which all use this lovely jubbly thing called the prefrontal cortex, which is right at the front of your brain there. So if you think prefrontal cortex, and sorry for being technical for a second, it's really consciousness, what's in your awareness. So to understand a new idea, to decide how to make a decision, to bring back something from long-term memory, to retain something, and to inhibit something, which means not getting distracted, it all requires the prefrontal cortex. And we already know from our previous sessions that this is a little bit of a temperamental beast. If things aren't absolutely tickety-boo, as I would call it, it's not going to function properly, and that's going to impact you. So let's just understand quickly again. If you're understanding a new idea, you're creating maps or networks in the prefrontal cortex and connecting these to other maps or networks in the brain. If you're making a decision, you're making a choice between those maps. You're effectively auditioning ideas and then choosing. If you're recalling, you're searching through billions of networks and maps, neural maps involved in memory, and bringing the right ones just at the right time to the prefrontal cortex. And if you're memorizing, you're holding those maps in your attention, keywords, in your attention, in the prefrontal cortex long enough to embed them, very interesting word there, embed, in the long-term memory. And then if you're inhibiting, that involves the effort to not activate certain maps. So switching everything off and keeping them from forming attention in the prefrontal cortex. So what does the prefrontal cortex have in common with this calculator? Can anyone tell me? No?
Sorry. Only one memory cell where to store temporary information?
Almost. I'll give you the answer. You can't subtract and add, or you can't multiply and divide at the same time on that calculator. It can only handle one calculation at a time. And that's what your prefrontal cortex has as well. In your attention, your brain, your prefrontal cortex only allows you to truly focus on one thing at a time. Now, you might think you're doing 2 things at a time, and I'll get on to why some of that is the subconscious. But in the absolute mindfulness, holding attention, prefrontal cortex, you can only do one thing at a time. And so that's really what this session is all about. Each of these 5 processes on the left-hand side involve complex manipulations of the brain's circuits. But you have to finish one task before another can begin. That's why you can't multiply and divide 2 numbers at the same time on the calculator. And each of those 5 processes on the left-hand side uses great amounts of energy and many of the same maps. So you can only do one thing at a time because you're using the same resources effectively. So really, the most important thing to understand about this prefrontal cortex that we've been talking about for a couple of months now is that the amount of information you can hold at once is limited. And what you can do with that limited amount of information that you hold at any one time is also limited. Once you understand that, then you understand that you can't truly multitask. You can organize, you can plan, you can set aside time to do things, but you cannot consciously do two things at the same time. And it's not, you know, Pete's theory, it's scientifically, biologically proven. You just can't. Now, the Harvard Business School, they did a study and they came up with a very interesting conclusion with regards to doing one thing at a time. If you try and do two conscious mental tasks at once, the key word there being conscious, of course, mindfulness and attention and focus, you're actually going to reduce your capacity to do anything efficiently by 50%. And you could actually take a PhD student and give them and effectively create the same mental capabilities as that group of kids on the left-hand side, just by asking them to try and do two conscious things at the same time. And this is what the Harvard Business School call dual task interference. The minute you try and hold these two things in your conscious mind, you've actually not got a sporting chance, effectively. This is a lady by the name of Linda Stone. She used to be a vice president at Microsoft, and she came up with this expression, which I think is really great: continuous partial attention. And it's all about working in the modern world. And you guys can relate to this just as much as me. It's this idea that you've always got to be connected. You've always got to be on at any time, any place. You know, I joke about my kids, you may do about yours, you know, because I'm of a certain age. But, you know, my kids, it's almost like their phone's attached to them. It's an appendage to the arm or the hand. You know, it's like they can never put it down, or the iPad, or they've always got to be connected or communicating, or always be aware, or checking their emails or the voicemail messages or something like that. But this continuous partial attention actually contributes to the fact that you become more and more inefficient, because your prefrontal cortex, as it were, is fighting for, well, which bit do you want me to do? You know, it's almost like, well, there's confusion and it takes energy, and all of a sudden, to I think Samantha's point, you feel really tired, because this all takes an inordinate amount of energy in the brain just to try and juggle these things. So my one of my summary items today, which I alluded to at the start, very controversial, but multitasking is the very definition of insanity. Because what is insanity? You keep doing the same things over and over and you hope that the outcome will somehow be different. Well, if you're in this continuous partial attention or dual task interference mode, you are just, it's an insane process. It's not even reasonable to expect it. And yet, what do we do at work? We expect ourselves to be able to do it. We expect our direct reports to be able to do it. We look at our managers, or you know, the people above us in the food chain, and expect them to do it, but they can't. It's impossible, absolutely impossible. And the University of London actually did a study as well, and it said that people who are constantly on their phones or similar devices, checking emails, looking at social media sites, and that sort of thing, they've actually come up with a study that says men will actually reduce their IQ by 15% by always being on, and ladies will reduce their IQ by 5% by always being on. I don't know why there's a difference, and I've not gone into that detail, but that was all done at the University of London. But it's this concept, this idea that you've always got to be on, that there's no downtime, you can't relax. And then what Linda said again, and this to me really resonated for me. I'm going to read this to us. This always on, anywhere, anytime, any place era has created an artificial sense of constant crisis. What happens to mammals in a state of constant crisis is the adrenalized fight or flight mechanism kicks in. It's great when tigers are chasing us, but how many of those 200 emails a day is a tiger? Think about that for a second. This always on, anywhere, anytime, any place era has created an artificial sense of constant crisis in the prefrontal cortex. And when we're in this state of constant crisis, the fight or flight mechanism kicks in. And therefore, the question to ask yourself is, How many of these 200 emails a day is actually a tiger that I need to do something about?
Sorry, I want to jump in just on that kind of that quote. And it was funny. I think I had mentioned this before. It was one of these things about this. When people go into that state of anxiety and just kind of, constant crisis, as she says here, and it's that fight or flight, your cortisol levels raise and you constantly have that anxiety. And that goes back to that feeling tired, feeling, just kind of downright exhausted. Your body doesn't feel good because what starts to happen is all the other things within your body shut down, and this is one of these things. It was a funny thing is saying that this is sometimes why you struggle to lose weight or you struggle to get moving, to get exercising. It's because your body is fighting this. So that I think is a really interesting quote, and you can see how it ties back.
Yeah. All right. It's also been proven, by the way, that if you're always on in this sense, on emails, etc., 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 you actually get more emails and messages because people start to notice that you respond quickly. So if you know that Pete's going to respond quickly, you send him twice as many emails or twice as many communications because you know you're going to get an answer back, or you have this trust that somehow, because he's always on, he's going to get back to us, therefore he's reliable, therefore I can trust him, etc., etc. But it defeats the whole purpose. So it's overwhelming, basically. You're asking the human body to do something it's incapable of doing. But there are one or two ideas that I can share with you that might help a little bit. Now, I'm going to apologize to Kelly because she did say to me after the last session, "Oh, Pete, don't get too technical with all these brain terms." And I'm not suggesting for one moment that anybody goes home tonight and says, to their partner, "Do you fancy going out for a drive tonight, dear? I'd really like to give the basal ganglia a bit of a run out." And if you do, by the way, I know a very good therapist. But it is important that we understand that there are certain things going on in our heads. And this is one of them, how the brain stores routine functions. That can help us. Because if the prefrontal cortex is all about the conscious mind, what you're aware of right now while I'm speaking, then the basal ganglia, and there's more than one of them, are the subconscious mind. And if you've embedded routines in the subconscious mind, you could potentially do two things at once, although only one of them consciously. This is what I'm talking about. Think about you're going for a drive in the car with your partner. You're driving along and you're having a lovely conversation. The lovely conversation is the conscious mind, the prefrontal cortex. The driving along and hopefully not running anyone over or having an accident is actually the subconscious mind. It's embedded in you because you've learned to drive. When you were learning to drive, you learned how to hold the steering wheel. You learned how to switch the car on. You learned the rules of the road. All of those things through practice and repetition are embedded. That's the key word. They are embedded. They're part of your long-term memory, which means you can, in that sense, do two things at once. So the trick here is, what can I try and embed into my subconscious mind, or if you want to give it the technical term, the basal ganglia, that then allows me to focus and give my attention to something else. The other thing to be aware of are things called bottlenecks and cues. So any decision that's holding up another decision is actually a bottleneck. A bottleneck is a series of unfinished connections that take up mental energy and therefore form a queue. I mean, I've just given you, a printer queue there just for illustrative purposes, but it's the same principle. A bottleneck being a series of unfinished connections or decisions that take up more of your mental energy and form an actual queue. Now, actually, the solution to that is to get everything in the best possible order. So just as a simple example, there you had the letters B, G, D, C, A, F, E, which you could actually arrange to be A, B, C, D, E, F, G. And that looks more something that we would recognize. And we could say, oh, that's ordered. I don't have to expend as much energy understanding those letters. Same thing with the numbers. 7, 3, 6, 1, 4, 5, 2 becomes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Get everything into the best possible order. It helps to reduce the number of bottlenecks and decisions. Therefore, you can move forwards and give your attention to something else. So here's a little test for you. Planning an off-site meeting. Here are a few questions that you might ask yourself if you've been given the task of planning an off-site meeting. What is the date of the meeting? How many people are coming? What's the size of the room required? Are there any special dietary needs? What time can the meeting start? Who is invited to attend? What time should the meeting end? Where are the attendees coming from? Who has confirmed that they're coming? And will anyone require a hotel for an overnight stay? Now, if they were the only questions relevant to this, they're not ordered yet. They are the letters in the wrong order and the numbers in the wrong order. They are potential things that you would need to know. So what would your best order be? Just take 30 seconds to look at those sentences and try and figure out what is the order in which I should answer those questions. The date of the meeting, how many people are coming, what is the size of the room, are there any special dietary needs? Is that the first thing I need to know? What time can the meeting start? Who's invited? What time should the meeting end? Where are the attendees coming from? Who has confirmed that they are coming? Is that the first question? Possibly not. Will anyone require a hotel for an overnight stay? So what would your best possible order be? And I'll just give you 15 seconds and then I won't go around the room because of the timing of today's session. I don't think we've quite got time for that. But what I will do is give you a potential order for those questions. But hopefully you will agree that if you've been given the task of planning an off-site meeting, they are some of the questions that you might ask yourself. So planning an off-site meeting, I said, what is the date of the meeting? Answer was Friday, January the 20th, 2023. Who is invited to attend? 25 executives and business people. Where are the attendees coming from? As it happens, they're all local. Will anyone require an overnight stay? No. Who has confirmed that they are coming? 21 can attend, 4 cannot attend. How many people are coming therefore? 21 plus the facilitator. What time can the meeting start? 8:30. What time can the meeting end? 4:30. What is the size of the room required? Between 25 to 30 people. Are there any special dietary needs? 5 vegetarian, 1 vegan, 1 gluten-free. Now that's not necessarily the only way of doing it, is it? But at least by ordering it in that particular order, I've taken away some of the bottlenecks and cues. Because I now know if I address those in that order and find the answers to those questions in that order, then I'm actually giving myself the possibility of not getting hung up and stuck. The third element of, trying to not multitask consciously, but eluding some of the pressure, if you like, is time management, which is a beautiful segue for Jane's session next week. But it basically says this: I accept and I recognize that I can only do one conscious thing at a time. Therefore, I'm going to block time off in my calendar to do certain things in a certain order. Do you remember when we said last month, prioritization? This is fundamental to this, because basically, if you know you have the most energy a certain time of day, and you have a task that you believe will take the most energy, then you block that time to do that task at the time of day when you've got the most energy. It's a very logical approach, but it's how time management will actually help you. But you're not really multitasking. What you're doing is saying, I will do this job first, and it will expend that much of my brain energy. Then I will do that task, but it's one at a time. One at a time, one at a time. If you order it in that way, you've at least given yourself a sporting chance, but it's not multitasking. So this is my multitasking summary. You can only focus on one conscious task at a time. And if you switch between tasks, it takes energy. So if you do it often, you will make more mistakes. That's empirically proven. If you attempt to do multiple conscious tasks at once, you will experience a big drop-off in accuracy and performance. And who's made mistakes because they've done that? The three solutions involve the subconscious mind, which is embedding the routine in the basal ganglia, the logical ordering of things, and time management. So if you catch yourself trying to do two things at once, slow down instead, because that's mindfulness. Embed repetitive tasks where you can. Get decisions and thinking processes into the right order to avoid decision cues. And if you have to multitask, if you're being asked to multitask, try and combine the conscious with the embedded routines as much as you can. But it's not easy. All right, let's move on to distractions, which are related to this. There are internal distractions and there are external distractions. I call them weapons of mass distraction. And some of those weapons of mass distraction are, you know, some of your social media sites like Facebook, Tinder, YouTube, even LinkedIn, you know what they are. But I will tell you this, in terms of a distraction, in the office, if you've gone back to the office after the pandemic, the Harvard Business School did another study that says, in the office with your colleagues, you are going to lose, it's not a question of if, you are going to lose 2.1 hours a day because of external distraction, meaning other things happening that you can't necessarily control. And the thing is that as humans, we can dedicate ourselves and be focused and in the zone for 11 minutes at a time. That's pretty much the maximum you can give something your absolute full attention. But you're always at the mercy of these things called external distractions. People tend to switch activities every 3 minutes. You may say, well, that's not me. But in your mind, you are switching activities every 3 minutes. And the problem with that is, if you've been in the zone for any amount of time between 3 and 10 minutes, it's going to take you 25 minutes to get back into the zone again. So you can see how a simple distraction can actually cost you almost an hour of efficiency, depending on how long the distraction lasts. And that's what the external distractions do. They take you out of focus, out of attention. When you try and get back your attention, it's really difficult to do. And we've experienced this, and I'm speaking to Chris really now at Next Dimension, when certain of our technical staff have said, please, please, please don't let anyone distract me for the next hour, because I've got this really difficult cutover to do. And if somebody comes and asks me a question or stands by my desk or something like that, I know it's going to take me 2 hours. So there is, you know, this recognition that sometimes these distractions, these interruptions can actually stop you from doing the most efficient job. The internal distractions is your own mind, because the mind loves to wander. We talked about this in one of our previous sessions, being the default network. When you start to tell yourself stories and your mind goes off, and remember, we were asking you to focus on the idea of sitting in your chair. And most people could do that for about 10 seconds, and then they thought of something else and their mind wandered off, and then they brought it back, but then it wandered off again. So you, on average, human beings have random thoughts every 10 seconds, and you pretty much can't control it. They're going to happen unless you're super, super disciplined. And that takes practice. And that's why people, you know, go through mindfulness practices and mindfulness exercises to try and extend the amount of time before your mind starts to wander. But naturally, the mind is inclined to wander. It wants to wander, even when you're trying to focus on something. So that's one of your internal distractions. Another internal distraction is the good old prefrontal cortex. And if you remember last month, I got Kelly to tell us the story of Goldilocks and why, you know, Goldilocks, the bed had to be just right, the chair had to be just right, the porridge had to be just right, the prefrontal cortex has to be just right. And if it's not just right, and if you've not given yourself the opportunity for it to be just right, then you're not going to be, quote, firing on all cylinders from a focus and attention perspective. And now, and completely spontaneously, Jane did not know that this was coming. We're going to do a quick exercise, and I want to thank Jane for volunteering, even though she didn't, because I think this will be helpful in showing us what distractions can do for us.
I'll
Jane,
get
are
you
you
for
ready?
I'll get you for this somehow, Pete.
All righty. In a second, I'm going to show you some words, and I want you to read the words as quickly as you can. Can you do that for me?
I'm making no promises.
All right, here we go. 3, 2, 1.
Red, green, yellow, blue, orange, green, red, green, purple, blue, black, orange.
Okay, read them backwards.
Backwards? Okay.
Yeah, take them backwards in order, not the words themselves.
That's what I say. Orange, black, blue, purple, green, red, green, orange, blue, yellow, green, red.
Well, that was marvelous. Nothing wrong with that whatsoever. Pretty simple, wouldn't you say? Would you say that's pretty simple?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Okay, good.
But I'm waiting. I know this. Okay.
As I
Yeah.
say, I know what's coming. Yeah.
Yeah. So now I want you to say the colours, not the words, as quickly as you can. Go.
Yes. Red, green, yellow, blue, orange, green, red, green, purple, blue, black, orange.
What just happened?
Oh, my brain was there's too many inputs, and we're used to reading words, not like the prefrontal cortex sees the word first because they're common words, and it just automatically reads. And so to think about what the color is instead is really hard.
Yeah. What you were having to do was to inhibit an urge. The urge was to say the word, not the colour. Like you said, your brain leapt immediately to, well, the word's green, so it's green. And then you had to do something called veto that thought and then bring it back to, well, actually it's red. So to do it, you actually had to take longer than just reading the words previously. And this is called the Stroop effect. This idea that you have to inhibit to avoid distractions. The fact that the word was a certain color, but the word wasn't the same color, was a distraction. And it made it very much more difficult for you to actually say the colors as opposed to the word. So the message is to say the color red when the word is green, to say the color green when the word is red, and to say the color blue when the word is yellow. You have to inhibit those automatic responses, and that's one of the 5 things in the prefrontal cortex that takes all your energy. So if there are distractions, they are going to be depleting your energy. That's a given. So
Pete, sorry, I was going to say, you had Vinay here put ganglia versus prefrontal conflict, ? And then Jason even put, curious what would happen if you read a character set or language you don't know.
Mm-hmm. I mean, the key lesson that I wanted to get across through this was maintaining good focus. I mean, actually, this is probably the aha moment of today. Maintaining good focus occurs not so much on how much you focus, but rather on how you inhibit the wrong things from coming into focus, e.g. distractions. So think about that for a second. It's not so much on what you are able to focus on, it's what you're enabled to not focus on that will enable the brain to be more productive. So I apologize again for Kelly, because I'm going to get a little bit technical just for 2 minutes. So we have this accelerator in the brain, language, movement, emotions, and memories. And to inhibit, we need to put the brakes on. And the brake in the brain in the prefrontal cortex is the ventrolateral prefrontal cortex. Kelly will never forgive me for this, but it's the most important thing to note as well, because it is a part of the prefrontal cortex, which means the brakes can only work effectively if conditions are ideal. Now think about that. If that were a car for a second, you wouldn't want a car that has brakes that only work well occasionally when conditions are ideal. But the brain is wired in that way. You've got to create the conditions by which you can actually inhibit and put the brakes on, but you won't be able to do it every time if the conditions aren't right. So unlike the car braking system, the VLPC only works at its best every now and then, but it's central to inhibition. So think about this. Each time you stop yourself from doing something, the next impulse is harder to stop. So if you think about that young lady there, just going to take a bite of that chocolate, the first time she looks at the bar of chocolate, she's going to go, oh, I don't need to eat that bar of chocolate. The next time she looks at the bar of chocolate, she's going, but I could. And so the ability to inhibit the desire to eat the chocolate is reduced every time you inhibit the impulse. Now, the way that the brain works is like this. You have 0.3 seconds when the subconscious mind says, ooh, I fancy a square of chocolate. You can't stop that from happening. What you can do is veto the idea that you've got to eat the chocolate. And you only have 0.2 seconds to do that. Just imagine that for a second. 0.3 seconds it takes the brain to send a signal to the conscious mind that says, I really fancy a square of chocolate right now. And you only have 0.2 seconds to actually go, I don't think I'll have one right now. That takes willpower. And every time you say no, you're depleting your ability to say no. So it's quickly game over. You can't prevent the subconscious mind actually from having that thought. The first 0.3 seconds are a given. All you've got is the 0.2 seconds to veto it, or the impulse or the urge. And if you can't do it, you can't do it. It's game over. So inhibiting distractions is a core skill for staying focused. To inhibit distractions, you need to be aware of your internal mental processes and catch the wrong impulses before they hold. I never said this was easy, did I? But it does explain why people and things never do what we want them to do. We're asking people to multitask. We're asking people to avoid distractions. We're asking to do things that very few people are actually capable of. And we show them no empathy or understanding when they don't do it. So I think there's a whole education process here, and it's one that Chris and I were talking about this morning. We're going to take our entire operations team through this in the sense that one task at a time to do it properly requires planning, plan, do, check, act, organization, embedding some processes when we can, and time management. But also this idea that we've got to keep those external and internal distractions from taking our awareness away from us. The minute we do that, we're scuppered from an efficiency perspective. And that's really the most important part about distractions, how you are able to keep them out of your conscious mind. So the summary for today reads something like this. Attention is easily distracted. I think we all know that. Distraction often comes from the narrative or the default network. Distractions exhaust the prefrontal cortex. The focus occurs through the inhibition of distractions, and each time you inhibit something, your ability to inhibit it again is reduced. Your veto power is reduced. When you need to focus, then try and remove all external distractions. Think back to my tech who says, please leave me alone. I was actually talking to our VP of Finance earlier today, and I said, if you really need to get that task done, she has an office which sits, and it has a glass door and a glass window and overlooks the open plan office in the Windsor office. And I actually said to her, if you need to get that task done today, which is important, go upstairs to one of the offices where you can shut yourself away, and there is no glass window, so hopefully no one can see that you're there. And you've just reduced your external distractions by a factor of X. If you do that and you can stay focused, you might actually finish that today. Then clear your mind before embarking on difficult tasks so that you avoid bottlenecks and cues and internal distractions like the weapons of mass distraction. Try to inhibit distractions early before they take on momentum. In other words, the more distracted you get, the more distracted you're going to be. And then it's really, really hard to come back to being in the zone or taking 25 to 30 minutes to get back in the zone. So again, none of this is easy. And, you know, the learning points for today really are, we have to educate ourselves our teams, our direct reports, and those above us to understand that sometimes asking us to be, quote, always on is actually the definition of insanity. It's physically impossible, and we shouldn't be asking people to try. Now, you might think that's really controversial, but I've really taken this to heart because I see it every day in our business. We are a managed services provider. We are IT risk management consultants and services. And it's very, very, very difficult to retain focus throughout the whole day when people are actually making demands that would effectively be multitasking. So we've got to take it on board as an organization. And really, you know, there are lessons for us, and maybe there are lessons for you too. So I'll leave it there for today and see if anybody's got any comments.